I thought I had it all figured out. I had worked my way up from the bottom. Early mornings, late nights, nothing could stop me from achieving my goal of becoming the youngest VP in the company. But all of that changed in one meeting. Veronica, my boss, was the kind of woman who commanded respect with a mere glance. She had a reputation for being tough but fair. If you worked hard and delivered results, she'd back you up. That's how I had climbed the ranks. But when she called me into her office that morning, I knew something was off. I walked in, confident as ever, and took a seat across from her polished oak desk. Veronica didn't waste any time. She threw down a report and gestured for me to look at it. "You're underperforming, Alex," she said, her tone cold and direct. "The numbers aren't where they need to be, and frankly, the project you're heading is starting to show cracks. You've got two options, demotion or fired." I could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. It wasn't the first time I'd faced criticism, but this was different. A demotion would feel like a failure, but losing my job entirely? That would be a complete disaster. For a split second, panic surged through me. The thought of walking away from the company I had worked so hard to build a career in felt impossible. But then something inside me snapped. I wasn't about to let her decide my fate. I wasn't about to let her tell me I wasn't good enough. Not when I knew I could do this. I took a deep breath, and with a calmness that surprised even me, I leaned forward in my chair. "I quit," I said, the words feeling both freeing and terrifying at the same time. Veronica blinked, caught off guard for a moment. She wasn't used to employees pushing back like this. But I wasn't just any employee. I was in charge of a $700 million deal that was supposed to secure the company's future. I'd spent the last 6 months pulling all-nighters, navigating complex negotiations, and building relationships with stakeholders that made me indispensable. I had my hands firmly on the wheel, and no one was going to take that from me. Veronica's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line. "You're really going to quit now?" she asked, her voice low and calculating. "You walk out of here, and you'll be handing that deal over to someone else. Think about it." I didn't need to think about it. I knew the consequences, but I wasn't going to let her scare me. If anything, the thought of standing up for myself made me feel stronger than I had in a long time. "I'm not afraid to walk away," I said, standing up from the chair. "You can't threaten me with something I'm already willing to leave behind." Veronica stood up too, but she didn't move toward me. Instead, she simply stared at me, sizing me up. "Let me make this clear," she said, her voice sharp. "You're walking away from more than just a job. You're walking away from everything you've worked for. You're throwing away your future. And for what? Some misplaced sense of pride?" I didn't respond. My mind was made up. I was ready to move on, ready to take control of my future. As I turned to leave her office, I could feel her gaze on my back, burning through me. She wasn't done yet, but I wasn't going to be her pawn any longer. I wasn't sure if I had made the right decision at first. As I left Veronica's office, the sound of the door closing behind me echoed through the quiet hallway. The adrenaline from the confrontation started to fade, and a deep knot of anxiety began to settle in my stomach. I had just walked away from everything. The promotion I had worked years for, the prestige, the financial security, but worst of all, the $700 million deal that I had single-handedly brought to the table. For the first time in a long while, I felt the full weight of the situation. The firm would be fine without me. Veronica would make sure of that. But me, I had no backup plan, no safety net, no idea what came next. I wasn't someone who was used to quitting. In fact, it was the opposite. I had always been the type to push through, to keep my head down and focus on the goal. It wasn't just about ambition. It was about proving to myself and everyone around me that I could do it, that I could handle the pressure, the stress, the expectations. But in that moment, I knew I had reached my breaking point. Veronica had made it clear that she didn't value my contributions, that all the hours I'd poured into that deal meant nothing. And it wasn't the first time I had been treated like this. The firm had always prided itself on being a place for high achievers, where only the best could rise to the top. But I had learned over time that being the best didn't guarantee respect, Nor did it mean you were safe from being thrown under the bus the moment things didn't go according to plan. Veronica's ultimatum had been the final straw. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how successful I had been, the game was rigged. As I walked out into the crisp air of the city, I realized just how big the stakes were. Walking away from the job meant walking away from the deal. The $700 million deal that I had worked on for over a year. The deal that could make or break the company. The one everyone was counting on to keep the firm afloat amidst an economic downturn. I had always been the one to make the tough decisions, the one who kept her cool when everyone else panicked. But now, I was the one facing a decision with no easy answers. If I didn't finish the deal, the entire project could collapse. Clients would pull out. Investments would be lost. And all the work I had put into making this deal happen would be for nothing. I tried to call my assistant Jenna, but the call went straight to voicemail. She had been working alongside me for months, helping me coordinate everything, handling the tedious details so I could focus on the bigger picture. She was as invested in the deal as I was, and I knew she'd be as shaken by my resignation as I was. By the time I reached the street, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from David, a senior partner I had worked closely with on the deal. "We need to talk. Where are you?" I sighed, staring at the message. David had been one of the few people in the firm who had supported me. He had always respected my work, and I had trusted him to help me navigate the politics of the company. But now, I wasn't sure where he stood. I walked to the nearby cafe, trying to clear my mind. As I sat down, I glanced at the clock. It was nearly lunchtime, and I had already wasted half the day. I couldn't afford to just sit around feeling sorry for myself. I had to figure out what came next. But where did I even begin? I ordered a coffee and sat in silence, letting the hum of the cafe wash over me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Veronica. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Eventually, I swiped to accept the call. "Alex," Veronica's voice came through, icy but controlled. "I want to make something clear. You think you're walking away from this firm with your head held high, but you're not. You're going to regret this. No one else can pull off the deal like you can. And when you realize that, it'll be too late." I closed my eyes, feeling the heat of frustration building inside me. "I don't need your threats, Veronica. I've made my decision. You think this is just about you walking away. This is about a $700 million deal, Alex. The company's future. Do you really think you can just quit and expect everything to fall into place?" She shot back. "I don't care about the deal anymore. Not if it means working under you," I replied, my voice shaking with anger. "I'm done." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. You'll regret this." I ended the call, throwing my phone down on the table. The truth was, Veronica's words had stung more than I cared to admit. She was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. The consequences of my decision went far beyond my own career. I had to face the fact that my quitting would have far-reaching effects on the deal I had worked so hard on. But I couldn't go back. Not now. I had to make a choice, whether to walk away for good or to find a way to finish what I had started. But how? How could I finish the deal when I had just walked away from the very company that depended on it? And worse, how could I face the people who had trusted me? The clients, the investors, and especially Jenna, who had worked tirelessly alongside me. I felt like I was about to let them all down, but I couldn't allow myself to be swayed by guilt. I had made my choice. But as the weight of the decision settled in, I couldn't help but wonder, was I truly ready for what came next? The next few days were a blur of unanswered calls, frantic emails, and constant reminders of the mess I had walked into. I had been prepared for the fallout, but nothing could have prepared me for just how quickly things would spiral out of control. David was the first to track me down. I had ignored his initial calls, but I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. He showed up at my apartment the next morning, his face drawn with concern. I had expected him to be angry, but instead, he looked like someone who was trying to hold together a broken puzzle. "Alex," he started, standing awkwardly by the door. "We need to talk." I didn't invite him in. There was no need for pleasantries, not when the situation was this dire. "What's the point, David?" "I've made my decision," I said, my voice cold, but somewhere beneath it was a trace of uncertainty. David sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're going to ruin everything if you don't reconsider. The deal, the one you've been working on for the past year, it's in jeopardy. You've handed over a $700 million deal without even thinking about the consequences." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I don't think you fully understand how deep this goes." I was silent for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Of course I understood, but it wasn't the deal or the money that kept me up at night anymore. It was the principle. It was about taking back control of my own life. Still, the reality of the consequences was starting to gnaw at me. The clients, the investors, Jenna. I had let them all down by walking away. David's voice broke through my thoughts. "Look, I get it. You're pissed, and Veronica's been a nightmare. But this isn't just about you and her. This is about the entire firm. The fallout from your resignation is going to affect more people than you realize. I'm not asking you to come back, but think about stepping in for the final push, just until we can close this deal." I met his gaze. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew he was right. The deal was my responsibility, and no one else had the same connections, the same understanding of the intricacies involved. I had put everything I had into this project. Every sleepless night, every negotiation, every last-minute call. Walking away from it now felt like abandoning the very thing I had worked so hard for. But what would stepping back into the firm mean for me? I had already burned that bridge. Veronica would never trust me again. And what about the emotional toll? I had been pushed to the edge. I didn't know if I could go back to the same toxic environment. "Don't think you're in this alone," David continued, his tone softer now. "I'm on your side, but you need to decide quickly. Veronica has already started pushing for a replacement, and if you let this drag on too long, we're going to lose everything." I stood up, pacing the small apartment. I could feel my pulse quicken. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just fighting for my career now. I was fighting for the future of everyone who had depended on me. Jenna, the investors, the clients, everyone. "I can't go back, David. Not to that place. Not to her," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But I also can't let this deal fail." David stood there, silent for a moment, before nodding. "Then we need to find a way to finish this deal without you stepping back into the firm. You're not going to be able to sit on the sidelines, but I'll help you navigate this. Just don't shut me out." I looked at him, conflicted. Could I really pull this off? Could I finish what I had started without completely sacrificing myself in the process? The next morning, I received a call from Jenna. Her voice was tight, almost frantic. "Alex, I need you to listen. I don't know what's going on, but the firm's been sending out feelers to the investors, trying to get someone else to take over the deal. I don't know how much longer we can keep this under wraps." I felt a pang of guilt shoot through me. She was right to be worried. But I had no idea how to fix this, especially without walking back into Veronica's clutches. Jenna continued, her words tumbling over each other. "Alex, they're offering a lower stake to the clients. And if we lose them, it's over. The deal is slipping away, and I can't." She broke off, taking a breath. "Please, come back. We need you. We're at the breaking point." It was the last thing I wanted to hear, but I couldn't just let it fall apart. Not when I knew what was at stake. "I'll figure it out," I said quietly, more to myself than to Jenna. "We're not done yet. I'll make sure of it." As the day dragged on, the pressure continued to mount. I spent hours drafting emails, making calls, and trying to get in touch with the key players involved in the deal. But it wasn't enough. Veronica had already begun to take control, pushing her own agenda and negotiating with the investors behind my back. She wasn't giving up that easily, and I realized that the conflict had become something much bigger than just me. I was locked in a battle not just for the deal, but for the very control of the firm. Veronica had her own vision, and it didn't include me. She had already moved on, seeking a replacement who could finish what I had started. But as much as I hated the idea of working under her again, I knew I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let the deal slip through my fingers, not after all the work I had put in. But the more I tried to manage the situation on my own, the more I realized how impossible it was. I had no support system left in the firm, no allies willing to stand with me. My colleagues, who had once been my team, had all chosen their sides, and Veronica's had grown stronger by the hour. I was running out of time, and my options were slipping away. The deal was slipping through my fingers. I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering through the window, casting long shadows across the room. The phone on my desk had been silent for hours, and I was beginning to feel the isolation of my decision. The past few days had been a whirlwind of endless calls, frantic attempts to salvage what was left of the $700 million deal, and the constant reminder that I was running out of time. Every moment felt like I was walking on a razor's edge, balancing between two worlds. The world of the firm I had walked away from, and the world I was desperately trying to create for myself. But as each minute passed, it became clearer that I could no longer exist in both. I had tried to stay away, tried to keep my distance, but the reality of the situation kept pulling me back in. Veronica's power moves were growing stronger, and she wasn't about to let me simply disappear from the deal. Every email, every call, every press release made it clear Veronica was moving forward without me. It was late that evening when I received the call that changed everything. It was from David. "Alex, we need to talk." "Now," he said, his voice tense, urgent. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my jacket, stepped out into the cold night, and made my way to the office building that I had once called home. The familiar skyscraper loomed ahead of me, but tonight it felt more like a prison than a place of opportunity. I was walking into the heart of the storm. When I arrived, David was waiting outside the front doors. His face was grim, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never noticed before: fear. "Come on," he said, motioning for me to follow him. "We've got a lot to discuss." We took the elevator to the top floor, where the executive suites were. The place was empty, the sterile hallway echoing under the weight of my steps. I had never felt so out of place here before. This had been my domain, my battleground. But tonight, everything felt foreign. David led me to a conference room where Veronica was waiting. She was sitting at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her eyes focused. She didn't even acknowledge my presence when I entered. "Sit down," Veronica said, her voice cold but firm. I took a seat across from her, refusing to let her see how much I wanted to back out. This was it, the moment where everything came to a head. I had been fighting for control over something that had never really been mine. Veronica had the power, the resources, and the determination to make sure I was left behind. "You think you can just walk away," Veronica began, her gaze never leaving mine. "You think you can quit and leave all this behind, but you're not done. Not yet." I didn't say anything. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my blood rushing in my ears. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. My career, my reputation, and everything I had worked for hung in the balance. But the more I sat there, listening to her words, the more I realized that the real battle wasn't with her. It was with myself. "You're making a mistake, Alex," Veronica continued, her voice tightening. "You think you're the only one who can make this deal happen? The only one who can fix this? You're replaceable, and I'll prove it." I felt the words hit me like a slap. Replaceable. Everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, didn't matter. To her, I was just another cog in the machine. "I'm done, Veronica," I finally said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "I've made my choice. This isn't about the deal anymore. It's about me taking back control." Veronica's face twisted into a look of disdain, but there was something else there, something more dangerous. "You're not walking away, Alex. Not now. If you think you can just turn your back on everything you've built here, you're wrong. You're going to regret this." I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the weight of the decision pressing down on me harder than ever before. But as I looked at Veronica, I realized something. This wasn't about what she thought of me. It wasn't about her threats or her cold, calculated power plays. It was about me. I could feel the anger inside me rising, but it wasn't the kind of anger that led to rash decisions. It was the kind of anger that had been building for months, even years. I was angry at myself for staying so long in a place that didn't value me. Angry at Veronica for taking credit for my work, for undermining everything I had sacrificed. But most of all, I was angry at the system I had been a part of, one that told me I wasn't enough unless I fit their mold. I looked around the room, at David, who had been quiet through the exchange, his eyes fixed on me. He knew what was at stake. I knew what was at stake. And yet, despite everything, I felt an odd sense of calm settle over me. "Veronica, I'm not afraid of you anymore," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "I'm done living in fear. I will finish this deal, but on my own terms." The room was silent for a long moment, the tension thick in the air. Veronica's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. She didn't speak for several seconds, but I could see the calculation behind her gaze. "You think you can do this without me?" she asked, her tone almost mocking. "I don't need you," I replied firmly. "I've already built what I need, and if I have to finish this deal without you, I will." For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was small, fleeting, but it was there. Veronica had underestimated me. She had assumed I was weak, that I couldn't walk away. But I had already made the hardest decision of my life, and everything after that felt like a natural progression. I walked out of that room with more than just my pride intact. I walked out knowing that I had faced my greatest challenge and emerged stronger because of it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew there were still obstacles to overcome, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The deal wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my power, my autonomy, and my sense of self. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The days that followed were a blur, but there was a strange sense of clarity now. The weight of my decision to leave the firm was heavy at times, but there was also a liberating sense of freedom I had never experienced before. No longer shackled by the expectations of Veronica and the corporate machine, I was able to think clearly for the first time in months. The constant buzz of office politics, the subtle undermining, the hollow compliments, all of it was gone. What remained was my ability to forge my own path. I didn't know where that path would lead, but I had the courage to walk it. And for the first time, I felt like I was the one in control. The first call I made after leaving the office that night was to Jenna. Her voice cracked with surprise when she answered, but underneath the shock, I could hear a glimmer of hope. "You really did it, didn't you?" she asked. "I did," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "And I'm not going back. But we're not done. I'll finish this deal on my own terms." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of negotiations. Without the firm backing me, it felt like I was navigating an entirely different world. The investors were cautious, but I had spent months building relationships with them. My time in the trenches, fighting for every small victory in the deal, had earned me respect. I wasn't just another cog in the machine anymore. I was someone they trusted. David continued to stand by me, though our conversations became more strained as he realized the extent of Veronica's control over the firm. He had been the one to warn me about what was at stake, but now he understood that the deal wasn't just about the money. It was about something far more personal. Still, he was determined to make things right. We worked late into the nights, hashing out strategies, finding ways to move forward without Veronica's interference. Meanwhile, Veronica continued her campaign to undermine me, but with each passing day, her grip on the deal weakened. She underestimated the strength of my resolve. She thought I was disposable, but I had become something she couldn't ignore. The longer I worked from the outside, the more my influence grew, and I could see the cracks in her facade. Then, one day, after what felt like a lifetime of negotiations, I received a call that would change everything. "Alex," the voice on the other end said. It was one of the major investors I had been working with. "We've decided to move forward with you. We want you to take the lead on this project. You've shown more dedication, integrity, and vision than anyone else involved. We trust you to see this through." For a moment, I didn't speak. I had known this moment was coming, but hearing the words made it feel real. I had done it. I had completed what I set out to do. Against all odds, I had proven that my worth wasn't defined by the firm I worked for or the position I held. It was defined by who I was as a person, and the strength of my character had carried me through. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest as I finally responded, "Thank you. I won't let you down." The final steps of the deal came quickly after that. With the support of the investors, I was able to finalize terms, secure the necessary agreements, and present the project to the clients. The deal went through. The $700 million deal that had once felt like a distant dream was now a reality. I remember the day it closed like it was yesterday. I stood in front of the conference table, looking out at the faces of the clients and investors who had gathered to see the deal come to fruition. I had done it, not just for them, but for myself. I had stood my ground, faced the darkness, and come out on top. As I signed the final paperwork, I couldn't help but reflect on how much I had changed. The woman who had walked away from Veronica's office a few weeks earlier was a far cry from the one who had entered. Back then, I was lost, unsure, and desperate to please. Now, I was stronger, more certain of myself, and not willing to compromise on my values. In the aftermath, I began to make my next move. I knew that my future didn't lie in returning to the same corporate world I had left behind. I had learned enough from that environment to understand that my true path would require something different. But that didn't mean I had to abandon everything I had built. I still had the relationships, the expertise, and the experience to carve out a new path for myself, one that aligned with my values and vision for the future. David reached out one last time before I left the office for good. We met for coffee, and he told me something that stuck with me. "You were right," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I didn't see it before, but I get it now. You didn't just walk away from the firm. You walked away from the system that was designed to break you. You took control of your own destiny." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And it was. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, none of it had been in vain. I had learned that true power comes from knowing who you are and not being afraid to stand up for what you believe in. I had been tested, pushed to my limits, and forced to confront my fears. And in the end, I came out stronger, more capable, and more certain of myself than ever before. As I walked away from the office building one final time, the sun dipping below the horizon, I felt the weight of the journey lift off my shoulders. I was no longer defined by the expectations of others. I was no longer shackled by the corporate machine. I was free. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I was ready to face it on my own terms. I had proven to myself that I didn't need to rely on anyone else to achieve success. And with that knowledge, I was ready to build something new, something that was truly mine.